Welcome to worship on this July 3rd, the day before our Independence Day, and the day that we're going to begin a new series of sermons on the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Listen for God's word to you as I read from Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God, and these he brought to the land of Shinar, and he placed the vessels in the treasury of his gods. Then the king commanded his palace master Ashpenaz to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. They were to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine, and they were to be educated for 3 years, so that at the end of that time they could be stationed in the king's court. Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the tribe of Judah. The palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine, so he asked the palace master to allow him not to defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion from the palace master. And the palace master said to Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king. He has appointed your food and your drink. If he should see you in poorer condition than the other young men of your age, you would endanger my head with the king." Then Daniel asked the guard, whom the palace master had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the royal rations, and deal with your servants according to what you observe." So he agreed to this proposal and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. So the guard continued to withdraw their royal rations and the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. And to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and wisdom. Daniel also had insight into all visions and dreams. At the end of the time that the king had set for them to be brought in, the palace master brought them into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. Among them all, no one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And therefore, they were stationed in the king's court. In every matter of wisdom and understanding concerning which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel continued there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Thanks be to God for the reading of this holy word. And Lord, may you speak to our hearts today and reveal to us your will for how we live in a world that is not always very understandable. Today I am beginning a series of sermons looking at the great apocalyptic book of Daniel, because I think maybe we all feel like we are living in an apocalyptic period of our own. We are experiencing crisis after crisis, some of which are the outcomes of our own unsustainable use of the earth's resources, bringing slow but escalating changes to our climate. But on top of that, we are still working our way out of the COVID pandemic, and we are living with the uncertainty of what Russia's war in Ukraine will lead to. And we are watching our fragmented nation try to deal with the attempted coup and overturning of our nation's democratic process. And we are doing that while nearly half the country is in denial that this coup even happened. And many of them are ready to start a civil war, and they have the guns that we have seen used over and over by our own homegrown terrorists in our schools and churches and synagogues and even in nightclubs and concerts. And I'm sure you don't want me to continue that litany, because the weight of it all has been heavy upon us. Suffice it to say, there is good reason that one of the most popular movie genres recently featured by Hollywood are horrible apocalyptic ends to the earth in various ways. Most of these movies have a hero or a solution to save the world from whatever nuclear destruction or an asteroid impact or a global plague or an alien invasion. And there I go again on another litany of disaster. But almost always in these movies, there is a story of salvation for the world, or at least for a remnant of humanity who can rebuild a new world. Apocalyptic stories have a long history, and the book of Daniel is one of the earliest. In biblical apocalyptic storytelling, the heroes who rescue the world are the people who will stay faithful to God. There is a moral and faith focus for surviving the disaster, the global disaster, which leads to a new beginning. And in biblical apocalyptic literature, the story is told as an encouragement to those who are already experiencing some form of disaster. They are not books about predicting the future, as they are so commonly read, but instead they are fantastical stories designed to encourage a suffering faith community to hang on to hope and faith in God until salvation comes. The book of Revelation, at the very end of the Bible, is written to the early Christian churches who are facing severe persecution by Roman emperors Nero and Domitian. And that early Christian community was encouraged to trust that God's ways would ultimately prevail, and that they should keep the faith, trusting in God. The book of Daniel was likewise written for the Jewish people who were suffering under the oppressive reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek king who has oppressed the Jewish nation and defiled the temple, turning it into a place of worship for Zeus. Both the books of Daniel and Revelation have been fundamentally misunderstood by many Christians who have read them and taught them to others as predictions of future events, so that by studying them we can somehow know mysteries and secrets that are hidden and know how the world ends. There's a huge industry of Christian books and movies based on this misguided reading, and there are pastors who fashion themselves as end times experts who preach on these topics as if they have figured out the codes to prepare you for the future. Let me say, anyone who claims to be an end times expert has already revealed that your best step into the future is to stop listening to what they're peddling. Well, that's a bit of a long introduction to our passage today, but when we look at apocalyptic stories, I think we need to take the time first to clear the nonsense that usually gets talked about regarding these stories. And then we can begin to hear their message of hope. That's what they are, a message of hope. Daniel begins with stories set in the past, not only for us, but stories that were set in Israel's distant past when they were written, at the time that they were written. Daniel is encouraging the Jewish people experiencing the evil oppression, I said, of the Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes around 165 years before the birth of Christ. But the stories about Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, these are set about 350 years earlier than that in Israel's history, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar was destroying the remaining southern kingdom of Judah and its capital, Jerusalem, and he was taking the Jewish people as slaves and sent them into exile from the promised land. The reason for looking back to an earlier, desperate time in history is to encourage people that God will be faithful to them now in their own moment of suffering, just as God was faithful in the past to Daniel. And so, we meet Daniel, the faithful hero in the story, along with his exceptional friends, all of whom have been selected from among the Jewish captives because they are both brilliant and beautiful. If you read the passage, they've got hot bodies and brains to spare, making them fit to serve royalty and not just to toil away in their slavery making bricks or something like that. In one way, they've got it made. They will live in relative luxury, enjoying the fine food of the palace, and they will receive a free education in all the knowledge and wisdom of Babylon. The only drawback for men like Daniel and his friends is that they will be slaves for the rest of their lives. But they will be slaves in the halls of the greatest political power on earth. As slaves, their bodies were fully the property of King Nebuchadnezzar. He gave them new names, stripping away their Jewish identity and substituting what Nebuchadnezzar believed to be a superior Babylonian culture, religion, and language. Each of their new names refers to at least one of the Babylonian gods, Bel, Marduk, or Nabu. As slaves, they were to dress as they were told and to eat as they were told. Every aspect of their somewhat luxurious life now was prescribed for them. Daniel and his friends had no freedom, although the text does not say this. The common practice throughout the ancient Middle East for men like this, serving as slaves in the great palace of rulers like Nebuchadnezzar, as counselors because of their brilliance, the common practice was to steal their gender and turn them into eunuchs, so that such handsome men would not be trouble among the king's harems. Female slaves served as sexual objects to be used, while male slaves were neutered and neutralized as a threat. The story of Daniel may leave out this detail as a matter of respect to them, but the people would have understood the implications. What I'm getting at here is the power of the king over every aspect of these men's lives. They were to radically conform to the king's wishes in their thoughts, their beliefs, their actions. And in this first chapter, Daniel, now called Belteshazzar, and his rebranded friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, dare to request a small measure of independence. In order to remain faithful to Israel's God, they wanted to eat according to Jewish dietary laws. The royal rations they were commanded to eat included many things forbidden to the Jews. And apparently, given the problem of deciding between the unfamiliar foods they were being served, they decided that the best option was to stick to the veggies. If you have ever had to deal with food allergies, you can understand how much simpler it can be to just cut out anything that might cause a trigger reaction. So they get permission to try this mini revolution, not from the king, but from their direct overseer, just long enough, though, to assess their health, 10 days. The overseer knows that he too is taking a great risk with his compassionate permission in this. If they don't look healthy at the end of the trial, he may face the wrath of Nebuchadnezzar. Notice that the text says approvingly at the end of those 10 days, the proof of their good health was seen because they were better and fatter than everyone else. That's a cultural thing. Sandra and I have both fluctuated in our weight over the years. When she was pregnant, my belly grew with hers. We were in seminary living in an apartment complex with students from Kenya, and Sandra was working hard to drop the pregnancy weight after our daughter Bailey was born. Now, one of our Kenyan neighbors noticed how much weight she had lost, and he pulled me aside, very concerned in his voice, and he was asking me if Sandra was all right. She was getting so skinny. He also asked me if I thought she looked more beautiful that way, because obviously he preferred plump bodies. Culturally, he did. Being heavy in many cultures is considered a sign of health because it shows that you have plenty of food. My friend was as scared to face his mother-in-law if he showed his mother-in-law that her daughter was now skinny in America. He was as scared of facing her as Daniel was afraid to face Nebuchadnezzar. The bottom line in this opening chapter of Daniel is that these young Jewish slaves, serving in the palace of the world's most powerful man, were able to resist his egomaniacal will and to do what they believed to be right and faithful to God. In the first chapter, we see this in a small matter of diet. But being faithful always begins with small steps. Daniel and his friends were meant to encourage the Jewish people who much later were being forced by another vicious world leader to reject God's ways and to worship Zeus. Daniel and his friends are an encouragement to every generation of faithful people to remain faithful and be on the right side of history when corrupt and powerful leaders demand conformity and loyalty to what we know is wrong and evil. As you can see, the apocalyptic story of Daniel may well have some strong parallels to our world today, whether we live in Russia or in the United States or in some other land ruled by people addicted to their own power. Go in grace today and celebrate our Independence Day and pray for the continuation of a healthy and robust democratic world, and democratic nation at least. And let's be on the right side of history. Amen.